It was late on a Sunday night at the very end of autumn, the clock just past 11, and the emergency room was crowded with tired families, coughing patients, and nurses rushing between curtained bays. Outside, the wind rattled the glass doors, carrying with it the rattle of dry leaves scraping across the concrete. The air smelled faintly of antiseptic and rain-soaked coats, and in the middle of that chaos, a young mother pushed through the entrance, her arms wrapped tightly around a small child who whimpered against her shoulder. Natalie Morgan was only 28, but the lines of exhaustion on her face made her appear older in that moment. She clutched her 6-year-old daughter Lily, who pressed both hands against her stomach, her cheeks flushed with fever, her little legs dangling lifelessly in the crook of her mother's arm. Behind them, Olivia Morgan Natalie's mother, nearly 50, hurried in with wide, frightened eyes. Her knuckles were pale against the steering wheel only moments before, and even now her hands shook as she tried to help steady her daughter and granddaughter. The waiting area parted for them as the triage nurse caught sight of Lily's condition. Something about the urgency in Natalie's voice and the color of the child's skin cut through the usual routine. The nurse called immediately for a doctor. "Room 1 now," she said sharply, her hand motioning down the hall. Natalie could barely catch her breath as she followed whispering desperate reassurances to Lily, who whimpered that her stomach hurt too much. The nurse's face betrayed tension, and Olivia, watching, felt a chill run through her veins that had nothing to do with the autumn wind still seeping through the door. Within moments, Dr. Catherine Jenkins appeared. She was calm, her expression professional but not cold, the kind of presence that steadied frantic parents, even as her eyes registered the seriousness of what she saw. She asked Natalie to set Lily gently on the examination table and with practiced gentleness began asking the child questions in a soft tone. "Sweetheart, can you tell me where it hurts the most?" Lily lifted one trembling hand and pointed low across her stomach, her eyes squeezed shut in pain. Dr. Jenkins touched the area lightly and Lily flinched sharply. Natalie's breath caught and Olivia's throat tightened as though she herself felt the stab of pain. "How long has she been like this?" Dr. Jenkins asked, her eyes briefly flicking toward Natalie. "Since yesterday evening," Natalie answered, her voice hoarse. "She just came back from the weekend with my father. I thought maybe she was just tired, but tonight the pain got worse. She has a fever. I could not wait any longer." Dr. Jenkins nodded her pen, scratching across the chart. "We need to run urgent tests," she said firmly, but before she left the room, she reached down and smoothed Lily's hair with a touch that was almost maternal. Nurse James entered just then carrying supplies, his presence different from the briskness of the other staff. He had a kind face, one that children seemed to trust. He crouched beside Lily and whispered, "Hey there, kiddo. I know you are scared. I was sick too when I was about your age. My mom sat with me all night. You are not alone, and we are going to help you." Something in his gentle tone made Lily relax slightly, even as tears still slipped from her eyes. Natalie felt her own tears threatening, but she swallowed hard, trying to stay strong in front of her daughter. Olivia stood behind her daughter, her hand resting lightly on Natalie's shoulder, and in that instant, she thought of the last conversation with Richard, her husband, just 2 days earlier. He had insisted on taking Lily for the weekend, claiming he wanted to reconnect as a grandfather. Olivia had convinced Natalie to let it happen, repeating the tired phrase that family deserved second chances. And now, as she watched her granddaughter lying pale beneath harsh fluorescent lights, guilt gripped her with cruel strength. Dr. Jenkins stepped outside for a moment, her face turned away as she pulled out her phone. Natalie, too distracted to notice, pressed her forehead to Lily's small hand and whispered that everything would be all right, even though her own voice trembled. The beeping of monitors filled the silence. Then, in the hallway, Dr. Jenkins's voice cracked slightly as she requested immediate assistance. "This is Dr. Jenkins in ER 1, 6-year-old female, possible ingestion of controlled substance. I am requesting immediate law enforcement presence." Olivia could not hear the words, but she felt the shift in the air, like the drop in temperature when the autumn wind gusts through a broken window. Something irreversible had just begun. Lily had drifted into a half-sleep, her lips parted as she clutched the corner of her worn stuffed cat against her chest. Natalie bent over her, brushing damp strands of hair from her forehead, her own chest heaving with the effort to stay calm. She turned her face toward her mother, her eyes filled with anguish. "Mom, she was fine before. She was fine when she left with him. What did he do?" Olivia could only shake her head, tears spilling silently. She wanted to say it was a mistake, that it was nothing serious, but she could not force the lie past her lips. The harsh truth was spreading inside her cold as the night wind outside. The fluorescent lights above seemed harsher, the sterile room more suffocating. A sense of dread thickened until even breathing felt heavy. In that moment, Olivia remembered the nurse's words when they first rushed in, "We will prioritize her right away." It struck her that her granddaughter's case was different, urgent, dangerous. The thought pierced through her denial. Somewhere in her mind, she still held the image of Richard smiling, convincing, pretending to be the grandfather Lily deserved. That image was now burning away. In its place remained only the outline of something darker, something she had refused to see until it was too late. Dr. Jenkins returned her expression carefully measured, but Natalie could see the urgency in her eyes. She spoke with clarity, telling them that Lily would be admitted immediately, that tests would be run, that she would remain under observation until they had answers. Natalie nodded numbly, her hand never leaving her daughter's. Olivia moved to the side, her own body heavy with the weight of guilt. Outside, the autumn wind howled again, rattling the glass in its frame. In another room, a baby cried somewhere else. A monitor beeped steadily, but in room 1 time seemed to slow to a crawl. The hook of dread had sunk deep, and none of them could yet imagine how far the line would pull them into the shadows of truth. Before the camera of memory could fade to black, Natalie's whisper cut through, fragile yet fierce. "Hold on, Lily. I will not let anyone hurt you again." And so began the story that would unravel everything they thought they knew about family loyalty and betrayal. Before we go deeper into what unfolded, take a second and drop a comment below. Tell me where you are watching from, because this is not just my story. It is a story about how fragile trust can be and how far a mother will go to protect her child. The morning came slowly, heavy and pale, as if even the sun struggled to break through the thick autumn clouds. It was Monday, the day after the frantic rush to the emergency room, and the world outside the hospital moved at its usual rhythm, but for Natalie Morgan and her mother, Olivia, time felt warped. The automatic door slid open and closed as patients arrived, coats dripping from the night's rain. But what caught Olivia's eyes as she stood briefly near the entrance was the quiet dance of the last autumn leaves. A few stubborn yellow leaves clung to the branches above the hospital steps, but most had already let go. They swirled in the wind, circling down onto the wet pavement, their slow spiral reminding her that another season was ending. She hugged her coat tighter as if to shield herself not just from the chill, but from the weight of guilt pressing down on her chest. Inside the ward, Natalie sat at her daughter's bedside. Lily had finally drifted into a light sleep after the nurses adjusted her IV and placed a warm blanket over her. Natalie's eyes were ringed with fatigue, her hair loose and messy from running her hands through it all night. She had not left the chair by the bed. Her fingers remained wrapped around Lily's tiny hand, as if letting go even for a second might mean losing her forever. Every now and then, Lily stirred, whispering "Mommy" in her half-sleep, and Natalie would lean forward and murmur soothing words until her daughter's breathing steadied again. Olivia walked in and paused by the window. The thin morning light filtered through the blinds, striping the floor in uneven shadows. She pressed her palm against the glass, feeling the cold seep through. Outside, she could still see the leaves tumbling across the hospital drive, chased by a restless wind that reminded her of another time, many years earlier, when she had been the one in a hospital waiting room with her daughter Natalie. Back then, Natalie had been the child with scraped knees and a frightened face, sitting silently as Richard loomed nearby, his voice sharp, his temper even sharper. Olivia had told herself for years that enduring his anger was better than tearing the family apart. She had told Natalie to be quiet, to avoid provoking her father to accept his control for the sake of peace. The words haunted her now, echoing like a cruel chorus in her head. Be quiet. Endure. Keep the family together. She saw again the image of Natalie at 12 years old, clutching her arms against her ribs after an argument had exploded at the dinner table. Olivia remembered stepping between her daughter and her husband, not to protect Natalie fully, but to soothe Richard, to calm him, to prevent the situation from growing worse. She had thought she was keeping the family safe. In truth, she had only taught Natalie to suppress her pain. Now here they were, decades later, and the cycle had reached Lily. Olivia's throat tightened as she looked back at her granddaughter's small body under the hospital blanket. A single thought pulsed relentlessly through her. I pushed Natalie into this. I told her to give Richard another chance. I told her family deserves forgiveness. I told her he might have changed. The taste of regret was bitter, worse than any medicine. She moved toward the bed, placing a hand gently on her daughter's shoulder. Natalie glanced up, her eyes bloodshot from tears and exhaustion. "She is still burning with fever," Natalie whispered. "They said the test results will come later today. What if it is something permanent?" Olivia wanted to reassure her, but the words caught in her throat. She could not say everything would be fine, not when the shadow of Richard loomed over them again. Instead, she said softly, "She is strong like you. She will fight through this." Natalie's lips trembled. She should not have to fight. She is 6 years old. She should be playing with her friends and learning to read, not lying in a hospital bed because of him. The last word was spat out with bitterness. Olivia flinched. Natalie rarely spoke of her father directly anymore, but when she did, it was with the raw fury of someone who had carried wounds for far too long. Olivia looked at her daughter and felt a sharp stab of shame. She had been complicit, even if silently. She had stood by Richard too many times, defended him to relatives, explained away his temper as stress or pressure from work. She had told Natalie not to exaggerate. She had said her father loved her, that he just did not know how to show it. But Olivia knew better now. Love does not leave scars. Love does not create fear in the eyes of a child. The memory clung to her as she watched Lily shift uneasily in her sleep. A nurse came in briefly, checking Lily's vitals, adjusting the monitor, then quietly left again. The beeping of the machine returned to its steady rhythm, a sound both reassuring and terrifying, because every beep was a reminder of how fragile life could be. Natalie leaned back in her chair, exhausted, whispering, "I should never have agreed. I knew better. But you said maybe he had changed. You told me to let him take her." Her words cut Olivia to the core. They were not shouted, they were not even angry, but they carried the full weight of disappointment and blame. Olivia bowed her head. "I know," she admitted. "I was wrong. I wanted to believe he could be different. I thought maybe if he had time with Lily, he would remember what family means. But I was wrong. I was so wrong." Natalie closed her eyes and pressed her forehead into her daughter's hand. Olivia stood frozen, her guilt blooming larger with each second. Outside, a gust of wind sent a flurry of leaves skittering across the hospital pavement. They tapped against the glass like tiny accusations. The sound drew Olivia's attention back to the window, where she watched one last golden leaf fall slowly spinning down until it landed in a puddle and sank. She felt the symbolism pierce her. Something had ended. Something precious had been lost. She turned back to her daughter and granddaughter and made a silent vow. She would not be silent anymore. She would not excuse Richard anymore. She would not stand by while the cycle repeated itself. Natalie caught her gaze and for the first time that morning saw not just guilt, but a flicker of resolve in her mother's eyes. Olivia moved closer, brushed Lily's hair gently, and whispered to herself as much as to the child, "I will make this right." The words hung in the air, fragile but determined. Natalie heard them and nodded faintly, though tears still glistened on her cheeks. For a moment, 3 generations of Morgan women shared the same air, the same pain, the same determination. The season outside continued its slow transition, the last leaves drifting down to meet the ground, but inside that sterile hospital room, another shift was beginning. A mother who had been complicit was awakening. A daughter who had carried wounds was hardening into steel. And a child, innocent and fragile, lay between them, the living reason for change. The morning light grew a little stronger, breaking more fully through the clouds, illuminating the room in strips of pale gold. Natalie squeezed her daughter's hand again and whispered, "We are here. We are not leaving you. You are safe." Olivia looked once more at the leaves outside, and this time when she turned away, she felt the guilt tighten but also transform. It was no longer paralyzing. It was a call to action. She knew the path ahead would be brutal, but she also knew something with absolute certainty. She would not fail her daughter and granddaughter again. Friday afternoon had begun like any other, the fading light of late November casting long gray shadows across the neighborhood streets when Richard Morgan arrived unannounced at Natalie's door. He was punctual in his appearance, dressed in his usual pressed coat, his hair combed neatly back, the image of respectability he always worked so hard to maintain. He spoke with an ease that masked the tension beneath his surface, and as soon as Lily ran into the hallway clutching her small purple suitcase and bouncing with excitement, he announced his plan. "I am taking her camping for the weekend," he said, his voice smooth as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Natalie's stomach tightened. She immediately shook her head. "No, Dad, not without notice. Not like this." Her voice was sharp protective, but before she could continue, Olivia stepped in from the kitchen, drying her hands on a towel, her expression weary. "Maybe give him a chance," she said softly. "Maybe he really wants to spend time with her. People can change." Natalie turned to her mother, incredulous. "Change? After everything he has done? You told me he had changed before, and every time it ended the same." Olivia lowered her eyes, shame flickering, but her words were quiet and persistent. "He is still her grandfather." Lily, oblivious to the adult tension, beamed and bounced on her toes. "Camping, Mommy. Daddy says we will catch fish and make a fire." She hugged her stuffed cat tightly and looked at her mother with pleading eyes. Natalie hesitated, her resolve wavering as she saw her daughter's excitement. Against her instincts, against the alarms ringing in her mind, she let her mother's words sway her. "Fine," she said, finally, voice clipped. "But call me every night. Video call, not just text." Richard smiled the smile of a man who knew how to wear masks and replied, "Of course." He took Lily's suitcase with a casual air, promising it would be an adventure. Natalie bent down to her daughter's level, straightened her coat, kissed her cheek. "Call me before bed. Promise." Lily nodded, enthusiastically waved, and climbed into the back seat of Richard's car. The car pulled away, and Natalie stood in the doorway with Olivia beside her, the chill of late autumn blowing against their faces. She hugged her arms across her chest, shivering not from the temperature, but from something deeper. She watched until the car disappeared, then whispered, "Something feels wrong." Olivia placed a hand on her shoulder, but offered no reply. That night, the house was too quiet. Natalie set her phone on the table, waiting for the promised video call. 8:30 passed, 9 o'clock. Still nothing. At 9:30, she tried calling. Straight to voicemail. She tried again. The same. She left a message trying to sound casual for her daughter's sake, though her voice trembled. By 10 o'clock, her heart was racing. She called again and again, but each time the call failed to connect. Her chest felt tight, her breaths shallow, as though the walls of the house were closing in. At midnight, she sat on the couch with her phone in her lap, the television dark, the silence heavy, her thoughts spiraling. Olivia tried to reassure her, saying perhaps the reception was poor at the campsite, but Natalie felt the cold certainty of dread settling inside her. She barely slept. Morning came, bringing no relief. Saturday dawned gray, the sky thick with low clouds. A sharp wind rattled the gutters and stripped the last stubborn leaves from the branches. Natalie's phone remained silent. She called again at 7, at 8, at 9. Still no answer. She stepped outside onto the porch, pulling her coat tightly around her, and stared at the empty street as if willing her father's car to appear. The chill wind cut across her face, and she heard the dry scrape of leaves dragging across the roof before tumbling to the ground. The sound was like a warning, each leaf a messenger, whispering that something had gone terribly wrong. At 10 o'clock, a message finally arrived. A single text. "Poor reception at campsite. Lily fine. Having fun. Don't worry." Natalie stared at the screen, her anger mixing with fear. The words were too neat, too vague, as if copied from a script. She typed back immediately, demanding a video call, but no reply came. Hours passed. Noon arrived, then afternoon, and still silence. Olivia tried to comfort her daughter, but her own hands shook as she made tea. Neither of them drank. By evening, Natalie was pacing the living room, her phone clutched tightly, her stomach knotted. The wind outside grew colder, rattling the windows with each gust. The day dragged like a nightmare she could not wake from. Late that night, as she lay in bed staring at the ceiling, Natalie thought of the last golden leaf she had seen clinging to the branch outside her window. As she watched it finally let go, spinning down into the darkness, the image seared into her mind, a symbol of something slipping away beyond her control. Sunday would come soon, and with it the return of her daughter. She prayed silently that her fears were unfounded, that Lily would come home safe. Yet, beneath every prayer ran the cold, unshakable current of dread. Sunday afternoon arrived cloaked in a chill that felt older than the season itself, the kind of sharp wind that crept under doors and whispered of storms yet to come. Natalie stood on her porch with Olivia beside her, scanning the street for the sight of Richard's car. The air was heavy with anticipation and dread, as though the trees themselves held their breath. When the familiar vehicle finally appeared at the end of the street, Natalie's pulse quickened. She stepped forward, ready to scoop Lily into her arms, ready to hear her daughter's bright chatter about camping and adventures by the fire. But the scene that unfolded cut into her with brutal silence. Richard pulled up slowly, his expression unreadable. He did not park close to the house, nor did he step out to greet them. Instead, he opened the back door and gestured for Lily to come out. The child moved slowly. Her shoulders slumped, her eyes dull with exhaustion. She carried her stuffed cat in one hand, but her suitcase looked untouched, its zipper still closed, its fabric spotless. Natalie rushed forward, embracing her daughter, but Lily flinched faintly at the contact. Alarm jolted through her mother's heart. "Did you have fun, sweetheart?" Natalie asked, trying to keep her tone light. "I am just tired, Mommy," Lily whispered, barely audible. Richard handed over the suitcase with a casual air, his eyes avoiding his daughter's gaze. "She is just worn out. Kids play hard, then crash. You know how it is." Before Natalie could respond, he climbed back into the car and drove away without another word, the wind whipping dry leaves across the driveway in his wake. Natalie carried Lily inside, Olivia following with a face pale as paper. The house felt colder than usual as Natalie settled her daughter on the couch, tucked a blanket around her, and touched her forehead. The heat of fever radiated beneath her palm. Fear tightened her throat. She glanced at Olivia, who shook her head slowly. Guilt etched deep in her features. That evening, Natalie unpacked the suitcase and discovered that none of Lily's clothes had been worn. Her shoes were clean, her jacket free of dirt or pine needles. There was no evidence of camping at all. Natalie's heart sank. Something was terribly wrong. As night fell, the wind outside grew harsher, rattling the shutters, hissing through the cracks in the window frames. At midnight, Lily cried out, clutching her stomach with both hands, her face contorted in pain. Her skin burned with fever, her breaths shallow and quick. Natalie scooped her up, panic igniting every nerve in her body. She called out to her mother, and together they hurried toward the car, the cold night pressing in around them. Olivia drove her knuckles white against the steering wheel, her jaw set. Natalie sat in the back seat, holding her daughter tightly, whispering soothing words, even as tears streamed down her face. The world outside blurred past streetlights, flickering like broken promises. The trees along the road were bare now, their branches skeletal against the dark sky, their starkness echoing the fear clawing at Natalie's chest. Olivia glanced at her daughter in the rearview mirror and felt her own stomach twist with guilt. She had been the one to encourage this visit. She had told Natalie that Richard might have changed, that it was worth giving him a chance. Now, as she watched her granddaughter writhe in pain, she felt the crushing weight of that mistake. "Hold on," Natalie whispered fiercely to her child, pressing her lips to Lily's damp hair. "Hold on, baby. We are almost there." The hospital loomed ahead, its harsh fluorescent lights spilling onto the wet pavement. The wind swept across the parking lot, carrying with it the dry rustle of leaves that had yet to be cleared, swirling them around the car as Olivia pulled up to the entrance. They rushed inside the cold night, following them through the sliding doors before shutting out the world again. As the staff hurried to take Lily back into care, Natalie clung to her daughter's hand until she was forced to let go. She stood in the hallway, trembling, her heart pounding, her thoughts spiraling into darkness. Olivia touched her arm gently, her own eyes wet with tears. She opened her mouth to speak, but the words that came out were choked with regret. I thought he could be different. I was wrong. I was so wrong. Natalie turned to her mother, her face pale but her eyes blazing. No more excuses. No more chances. If he did this to her, then he is never coming near her again. Olivia nodded weakly, unable to argue the truth pressing down like the weight of the winter wind outside. The night stretched on, endless and merciless, as they waited for answers that would only deepen the pain. In that moment, the cycle of denial and fragile hope that had defined their family for so long cracked apart. The storm had arrived and nothing would ever be the same. The emergency ward seemed brighter than daylight, though the windows showed only blackness outside. The ceiling lights buzzed faintly, their sterile glow reflecting off white tile floors and metal equipment. Natalie sat rigid in the plastic chair beside Lily's hospital bed, her fingers gripping the edge until her knuckles turned white. Lily lay curled under the blanket, her lips pale, her breathing uneven. Machines beeped steadily but offered little comfort. Olivia sat outside the room, her posture hunched, her eyes fixed on the floor as the guilt that had been gnawing at her since Friday deepened into something unbearable. Dr. Catherine Jenkins returned with a clipboard, her face carefully composed, but Natalie could see the gravity in her eyes. We ran blood tests, she began, her tone professional yet gentle. Your daughter has traces of a sedative in her system. It is not something a child should ever have been given. We need to keep her under close observation. The words hit Natalie like a hammer. She felt her throat close, her vision blur, her body trembling as rage and fear collided inside her. What do you mean, a sedative? Are you saying someone gave her drugs? Her voice rose despite her effort to control it. Dr. Jenkins nodded slowly. We cannot determine yet how much or under what circumstances, but it is enough to explain her abdominal pain fever and lethargy. We have already notified the authorities. Natalie pressed a hand over her mouth to muffle a sob. Olivia, who had stepped into the doorway, gasped audibly. Her body sagged against the frame as if her bones had turned to ash. She whispered, "No, no, this cannot be real." Natalie turned sharply toward her mother, anger sparking through her anguish. "You told me to let him take her. You told me he had changed." Olivia's lips quivered, but she could not form a reply. Dr. Jenkins touched Natalie's shoulder gently, grounding her before panic consumed her entirely. Right now, the most important thing is keeping Lily stable. She is safe here. We will do everything we can. Nurse James entered the room with quiet steps carrying fresh blankets. His voice was warm, steady, almost like a balm against the storm. He crouched beside Lily and said softly, "Hey, kiddo, I know you are scared. You know when I was about your age, I got really sick too. My mom sat next to me all night and told me stories until I felt brave enough to fall asleep. You are not alone, not for a second. We are here with you." Lily's eyelids fluttered, and though she did not fully wake, her small fingers loosened slightly as though his words had reached her even through her haze of fever. Natalie felt a wave of gratitude for this man she barely knew, a nurse who treated her child as more than a case number. She whispered, "Thank you," her voice breaking. James gave her a reassuring nod. "She is stronger than you think. Kids always surprise us." He adjusted the blanket, then noticed something clutched loosely in Lily's small hand. Carefully, he coaxed it free, revealing a crumpled sheet of paper with colored pencil marks across it. He smoothed it out on the tray table, and the image came into view. Natalie's breath caught. The drawing showed a house large with many windows unfamiliar to her. Around the edges were dark, shadowy figures drawn crudely but unmistakably human. In the center stood a small figure with blonde hair, clearly meant to be Lily holding a cup. James studied the picture, his brow furrowed. "Sometimes kids draw what they cannot say," he murmured. He glanced at Natalie. "Do you recognize this place?" Natalie shook her head, her hands trembling. "No, but she was supposed to be camping. This is not a campsite." Olivia stepped closer, her eyes wide. The neon light from the hallway spilled over her features, accentuating every line of fear and remorse etched into her face. She whispered, "What did he do to her? What did he expose her to?" James handed the drawing to Natalie. "Hold on to this. It might be important." He looked at Lily again, his voice tender. "You did good, sweetheart. Drawing helps make sense of scary things." Natalie pressed the picture against her chest, tears blurring her vision. She remembered the way her father had insisted on taking Lily, the way Olivia had urged her to relent, the way her daughter had waved cheerfully as the car pulled away. Now that memory twisted into something grotesque, poisoned by the evidence in her hands. Dr. Jenkins stepped back and having overheard part of the conversation. "I am contacting a child advocacy specialist," she said firmly. "Her name is Dr. Rebecca Chen. She works with children who may have experienced trauma. She will help us understand what Lily is trying to communicate." Natalie nodded, numbly overwhelmed. Olivia moved to sit beside her, but Natalie pulled slightly away, her trust fractured. The silence stretched heavy until James broke it again, speaking gently. "You are not powerless. You have already taken the most important step by bringing her here. Whatever happened, she is safe now." Natalie wanted to believe him, but the image of her daughter in that strange house burned in her mind. She could not shake the vision of those shadowy figures surrounding Lily. She sat rigid, her body trembling with the mix of grief and fury that only a mother betrayed could feel. Outside the window, the neon hospital sign glowed against the darkness, its reflection flickering across the glass. The hum of the fluorescent lights filled the sterile space, but in Natalie's ears it sounded like the distant buzz of judgment, like the universe itself reminding her of the danger she had allowed. Olivia sat on the bench outside the room, her face hidden in her hands. She replayed her own words again and again. Maybe he has changed. Maybe give him a chance. Each repetition was a dagger. She thought of Richard's smile when he had driven away with Lily, the smooth assurance in his voice, the way she had ignored her own unease because she wanted to believe in the illusion of family. Now the illusion was shattered. The weight of guilt pressed on her chest until she could barely breathe. She whispered to herself, "I forced her into this. I told her to let him take Lily. I did this." Tears streaked her cheeks, but she did not wipe them away. They were deserved. Natalie remained inside, watching her daughter's chest rise and fall. Every movement, every breath mattered. She held the drawing tightly, her knuckles white. It was more than a child's sketch. It was a testimony. It was evidence. It was a plea for protection that had been ignored until now. Hours slipped by in the harsh glow of hospital lights. Nurses came and went, machines beeped, but for Natalie, time was frozen in the moment she realized her father had not taken Lily camping. He had taken her somewhere far more dangerous, somewhere that left shadows in her drawings and drugs in her bloodstream. Midnight came and went. Natalie did not move. Olivia eventually slid down the hallway wall, sitting on the floor with her arms wrapped around her knees. Her eyes were swollen from crying, but inside her chest, a new determination began to stir. She would not hide behind excuses any longer. She would not protect Richard from the truth. She had failed her daughter once, but she would not fail her granddaughter. She lifted her head, staring at the closed door to Lily's room. Beyond it, Natalie sat like a sentinel, fierce and broken, refusing to surrender. Olivia knew she needed to join her to stand beside her instead of against her. The night wore on, the neon lights humming the hospital settling into its strange rhythm of urgency and stillness. Somewhere down the corridor, a baby cried, then quieted. Somewhere else, a code was called and footsteps thundered past. But in room 1, there was only a sleeping child, a mother with fire in her veins and a grandmother drowning in guilt, but ready at last to wake. The story was no longer just about what had happened in the shadows of an unknown house. It was about what would happen now under the relentless glow of truth. And as Natalie sat clutching her daughter's drawing, she whispered into the sterile air, "This ends here." Monday morning arrived with a sky the color of steel, low clouds pressing down on the city as though the heavens themselves bore witness to the night before. Natalie sat stiffly in the hospital chair, her body sore from a night of vigilance. Lily slept more peacefully now. The fever eased slightly thanks to medication, but the worry had not lifted. Outside the window, raindrops streaked the glass, merging into crooked rivers that blurred the view of the gray parking lot. Each drop clung for a moment before sliding down like fragile promises unable to hold. Olivia returned from the cafeteria with 2 paper cups of coffee, though her hands trembled so much, one nearly spilled. She handed one to her daughter silently. Natalie accepted it but did not drink. Her eyes stayed fixed on Lily's face, pale and innocent, beneath the hospital blanket. The door opened and Dr. Jenkins entered with a folder, her expression cautious. Behind her stepped a new presence, a tall man in a charcoal suit with weathered features, his eyes steady, carrying the air of someone who had walked into many rooms like this. "Mrs. Morgan, this is Detective Michael Parker from the Special Victims Unit," Dr. Jenkins said. Natalie straightened, her heart pounding. The detective gave a respectful nod. "I am here to understand what happened to your daughter. We need to make sure she is safe and to uncover how she came to have sedatives in her system." Natalie gripped the coffee cup tightly. "She was supposed to be camping with my father," she said bitterly. "But she came home with a fever, stomach pain, and this in her blood. That is not camping." Parker's jaw tightened. He pulled a small notebook from his pocket. "I will need as many details as you can provide. Times messages anything unusual." Olivia sat heavily in the corner, guilt pressing her into silence. Dr. Jenkins stepped closer to Natalie. "Before that, I would like you to meet someone else." She gestured to the doorway where another woman entered, mid-30s, professional attire, kind eyes, carrying an iPad and a leather bag. "This is Dr. Rebecca Chen, our child advocacy specialist." Dr. Chen offered a gentle smile. "I work with children who may have experienced something difficult. I use art play and conversation to help them share what they cannot put into words." Natalie nodded warily. "She drew this last night," she said, handing over the crumpled drawing of the house with shadowy figures. Dr. Chen studied it carefully, her brow furrowing. "This could be significant. May I spend some time with her later today?" Natalie agreed reluctantly, her protective instincts warring with the knowledge that Lily needed help. As if sensing the shift, Lily stirred and opened her eyes. She blinked up at the unfamiliar man and woman in the room. Detective Parker knelt slightly to make his presence less intimidating. "Hello, Lily. My name is Michael. I help kids when something bad might have happened. You are very brave." Lily frowned faintly, her small hand gripping her stuffed cat tighter. Dr. Chen crouched too, producing a small set of colored pencils from her bag. "I hear you are an artist. I would love to see more of your pictures when you feel ready." Lily hesitated, then reached for a blue pencil and began absent-mindedly sketching on the paper tray attached to her bed. Natalie and Olivia watched, holding their breath as though the tiny motion could reveal the truth. Minutes later, Lily spoke softly, not looking up from her drawing. "There was a lady with red hair. She gave me a drink. She said it was medicine to help me sleep because I was too loud." Natalie's heart nearly stopped. "A lady with red hair," she repeated slowly. Lily nodded, drawing a cup with careful strokes. "She had shiny earrings. Daddy called her Sam." Natalie froze. The air left her lungs. Sam. Samantha Wells. Her best friend since college. The woman she had leaned on through her divorce, the one who had watched Lily on evenings when Natalie had to work late, the friend she trusted most. Her mind reeled. It could not be. Yet her daughter's words were unshakable. Natalie pressed a trembling hand to her forehead. Olivia gasped softly, covering her mouth. Detective Parker's pen scratched across his notebook, his face hardening. "You know this person." Natalie's voice shook. "She has been in my home. She has held my child. I told her everything about Richard, about my fears. And all this time," her voice trailed off, rage boiling with betrayal. Dr. Chen spoke gently, steering the moment back to the child. "Lily, can you tell me what the drink tasted like?" The little girl shrugged. "It was yucky. Made my tummy hurt." She switched colors now, drawing a clock with glowing hands. The man had a watch that glowed in the dark. Parker leaned forward. "What man, Lily?" "Daddy's friend," she said simply. "Victor. He had the watch." Parker exchanged a meaningful look with Dr. Chen. They both recognized the value of the detail. Victor Reynolds was a name Parker had heard before. connected to parties and prescription drugs. This was confirmation that Lily had been exposed to that world. Natalie's stomach churned. The betrayal widened with every revelation. Samantha, her friend, complicit. Victor, her father's associate, present. And at the center of it all, Richard, who had orchestrated the weekend. Olivia sat silently, her body shaking. She remembered her own youth, Richard pressing drinks into her hand when she was still a teenager, telling her to be quiet, to smile, to endure. She whispered hoarsely, "I should have known. He never changes." Natalie whipped her head toward her mother, eyes blazing. "You told me to trust him again. You said maybe he had changed, and now—" "Look at her." Olivia's eyes filled with tears. I know. I thought—" She broke off, choking on guilt. Detective Parker intervened, steady but firm. "This is not your fault. The responsibility lies with the adults who exposed Lily to this, and we will hold them accountable." Natalie's voice shook as she whispered, "I want justice. I do not care if he is my father. I do not care if she was my best friend. They hurt my child. They do not get to walk away." Dr. Chin touched her arm gently. "Your strength will help Lily heal. She needs to know her mother believes her and will protect her." Natalie nodded, tears spilling, but her resolve hardening. Lily had begun drawing another picture this time, a hallway with a large painting of a boat. The details were sharp for a 6-year-old, but her memory seemed clear. She hummed softly as she colored, as if retreating into the safety of creation. James entered quietly, checking her vitals. He smiled warmly at Lily. "You know what, when I was little and sick like you, I used to draw too. It helped me feel brave. My mom sat with me all night. You remind me of that. You are stronger than you think." Lily's lips curled faintly into the shadow of a smile. Natalie's chest ached at the sight. This small kindness from a nurse she had just met meant more than she could express. Outside, the rain continued to fall, droplets sliding across the glass like tears from the sky. The day pressed on gray and heavy, but inside that hospital room, the truth had begun to crack open. What had been hidden in shadows was now spilling into light, each drawing, each whispered word revealing the shape of betrayal. And as the drizzle streaked the window, Natalie whispered to herself, "This is the beginning. I will not stop until they answer for what they have done." Tuesday arrived with a bitter wind that sliced through coats and scarves as families hurried along the courthouse steps. The cold was not just weather, it felt like the atmosphere of the day itself, heavy with judgment and anticipation. Natalie Morgan walked with her mother Olivia by her side, her face set in grim determination. She held Lily's small hand until they entered the waiting area where Nurse James had volunteered to sit with the child during the hearing. Natalie knelt in front of her daughter. "I have to go inside for a little while. James will stay with you. Remember your brave journal." Lily nodded, clutching her stuffed cat tightly. James crouched down, his warm presence grounding the moment. "Your mom is fighting for you. Do you know something? You are stronger than you realize. When I was a boy, I had to stay in a hospital for weeks. I was scared, but my mom told me every night that courage means staying, even when you want to run. You are just like that, courageous." Lily looked up at him with wide eyes, and for the first time since the ordeal began, she managed a small, true smile. Natalie brushed her daughter's hair back, kissed her forehead, and turned to face the courtroom. Inside, the air was sharp with tension. The hum of whispers echoed as people filled the benches, their breath misting faintly in the cold air that seeped through old windows. Richard Morgan sat at the defense table, his jaw tight, his eyes darting nervously. His attorney leaned close, whispering strategy, while Richard's hands tapped restlessly against the polished wood. Across the aisle, Victor Reynolds sat with his own counsel, his posture arrogant, his expensive suit a stark contrast to the gravity of his charges. Samantha Wells was absent awaiting a separate hearing, but her name lingered in the documents and whispers, her betrayal still fresh in Natalie's chest. Detective Michael Parker stood ready with his files, his face grim, his presence steady as a stone. Rebecca Chin sat behind him, her notes prepared to support the testimony. Dr. Jenkins was present too, her medical expertise vital to explaining the test results. Natalie took her seat beside the prosecutor, her stomach tight with dread, but her resolve unyielding. Olivia sat directly behind her fingers, laced tightly together, her face pale, but her eyes sharp. The judge entered the room, rising, then settling into silence. The preliminary hearing began. The prosecutor outlined the case. A 6-year-old child returned from a weekend with her grandfather exhibiting signs of sedation confirmed by toxicology reports supported by testimony from medical staff and early statements from the child. Evidence seized from Victor Reynolds' residence included prescription drugs matching the substances in Lily's system, as well as indications of parties where children had been present. The defense countered swiftly Richard's lawyer painting Natalie as an embittered daughter twisting events to punish her father. He claimed the sedative could have been accidental, that Natalie's unstable emotions had clouded her judgment, that she was using the court to destroy her father's reputation. Natalie sat rigid, her jaw clenched as these words echoed across the courtroom. Olivia's hands shook with rage, her nails pressing into her palms until they left crescent marks. Dr. Jenkins was called first, explaining the toxicology results, her calm professionalism making the science clear. Then Dr. Chen spoke, describing Lily's drawings, her statements about the red-haired woman and the glowing watch, and how such disclosures from a child were consistent with trauma. Detective Parker detailed the investigation, the recovery of drugs and paraphernalia from Reynolds' house, the corroborating accounts from neighbors about late-night parties. The defense attempted to poke holes, questioning Natalie's parenting, implying bias, even suggesting Lily's statements could be fantasy. Natalie could barely contain her fury as the lawyer twisted words, his voice sharp with insinuation. But then Olivia rose from her seat, her voice trembling but clear. "Enough," she said. The judge allowed her brief statement. She turned to Richard, her husband of decades, the man she had defended too long. "I told my daughter to trust you. I told her you might have changed. I pushed her to let you take Lily, and now my granddaughter lies in a hospital bed because of it. You have hurt our family for years. I will not let you hurt them any more." The courtroom fell into silence. Every eye turned toward her. The only sound was the faint rustle of winter wind against the old windows. Richard's face flushed with anger, but his hands trembled. The weight of Olivia's words hung in the air like an immovable stone. Natalie felt a tear slip down her cheek, not from pain this time, but from the release of hearing her mother finally speak the truth. James in the waiting area told Lily a story about brave knights holding shields, his words carrying faintly through the hall as if echoing Olivia's stand inside the courtroom. The prosecutor seized the moment, pressing the case further, highlighting not only the medical and physical evidence, but also the pattern of behavior Richard had displayed for years. The defense faltered, their arguments fraying. The judge called for a recess. Natalie stepped out into the hallway, her chest rising and falling rapidly. Olivia followed, her eyes wet but her spine straight. "I should have done this years ago," she whispered. "But I am here now. I will not fail you again." Natalie took her hand, gripping it tightly. For the first time in decades, mother and daughter stood united. The recess ended, and when the judge returned, he reviewed the evidence and testimony. He ruled there was sufficient cause to proceed to trial. Richard Morgan was officially charged with child endangerment and abuse. Victor Reynolds faced charges of drug distribution and complicity in exposing a child to dangerous substances. Samantha's name was entered for complicity charges. The gavel fell, the sound like thunder cracking through the winter air. Outside the courthouse, the wind howled, carrying flurries of snowflakes that danced in the gray sky. Natalie emerged with Olivia beside her, Detective Parker just behind. The air was sharp, but for the first time in days, Natalie felt she could breathe fully. She bent down to embrace Lily, who had been waiting with James. Her daughter's eyes were tired but bright, and when Natalie whispered, "We are fighting for you," Lily smiled faintly, clutching her brave journal. The cold of the season pressed against them, but inside Natalie's chest a new fire burned. The path would be long, the trial brutal, but they had taken the first step. The chains of silence had broken. Thursday evening settled over the city like a heavy blanket, muffling sound and dimming light. A thin layer of snow had fallen throughout the day, coating rooftops and sidewalks with a soft sheen that reflected the amber glow of the street lamps. Natalie stood at her apartment window, watching flakes swirl in the night air, each one unique, each one destined to melt fragile yet undeniable in their presence. Behind her, Lily sat at the kitchen table, coloring in her brave journal Nurse James, leaning nearby as he checked the girl's vitals. His presence had become a comfort to both of them, a reminder of quiet strength. James smiled warmly. You know, when I was about your age, I had to stay in a hospital too. I was scared and lonely. But my mom stayed with me and told me stories about heroes. That is when I started drawing too. Every time I was afraid, I picked up a pencil and made a picture. You are braver than I ever was. Lily looked up, her cheeks glowing with the faint flush of health returning, and whispered, Do you think I am a hero? James nodded. Absolutely. Natalie's heart ached at the simple exchange. She turned back to the window, clutching the police report Detective Parker had given her earlier that day. It detailed the search of Victor Reynolds' home prescription bottles, evidence of parties, even photos suggesting children had been present. Reading it made her sick, but she forced herself to absorb every line. She would not look away. She would not give Richard the satisfaction of her silence again. That night, after James left and Lily was asleep, Natalie spread old journals across her bed, pages from her teenage years, spilled open ink smeared from long-forgotten tears. She read entries about nights Richard had forced her to drink wine at family gatherings, about the way he told her to smile when she wanted to scream, about the way Olivia had told her to endure for the sake of peace. Her chest tightened. The patterns stretched back decades. Her father had never changed. He had only perfected his control. A knock at the door startled her. It was Samantha. She looked haggard, her once immaculate hair, tangled her makeup gone. Natalie, please, she begged. I need to explain. Natalie's hands shook as she gripped the doorframe. Explain how you gave my daughter a drug. Explain how you betrayed me after all these years. Samantha's eyes filled with tears. Richard said it was just to calm her down. He told me you exaggerated, that you always made him out to be worse than he was. I thought I was helping. I see now how wrong I was. Natalie's fury boiled. Helping? You call poisoning my daughter helping? You were supposed to be my friend. You were supposed to protect her when I could not. Instead, you stood by him. Samantha flinched, tears spilling down her cheeks. I regret it. I regret everything. I cannot undo what I did, but I can give you proof. Her voice lowered. Richard made me record conversations. He wanted leverage in case you ever spoke against him. I still have one. He said, make her drink it so she learns who is in control. Natalie froze the words, cutting her like glass. You kept that. Samantha nodded, pulling her phone from her coat. I did not know what to do. I was scared of him. But I will give it to you if it helps protect Lily. Natalie grabbed the phone, her hands trembling. She played the recording and heard Richard's voice, deep and commanding, instructing Samantha to make Lily drink something. The sound of his manipulation and cruelty filled the room. Olivia, who had been listening from the kitchen, collapsed into a chair, sobbing. He never changed, she cried. I told myself he did. I told myself he could be better, but he never changed. I forced you to trust him, and now look. Natalie's chest heaved as rage and pain collided. She looked at Samantha with burning eyes. Get out. You will give that recording to Detective Parker, and then you will face what you did. But you are done here. Samantha nodded weakly and left her figure swallowed by the swirling snow outside. The apartment fell silent except for Olivia's muffled sobs. Natalie sat across from her mother, both women broken in different ways. Olivia reached for her daughter's hand, her voice shaking. I was wrong all these years. I defended him. I told you to endure. And now I see the cost. You, Lily, everything. Natalie squeezed her hand, tears running down her face. Then stand with me now. Do not look away this time. Olivia nodded fiercely. I will. I swear I will. The thin snow continued to fall, blanketing the city in deceptive peace. While inside Natalie's apartment, the storm of truth raged. She sent the recording to Parker immediately. Within minutes, his reply came, This changes everything. Later that night, Natalie lay awake, the sound of the city muffled by snow. She thought of Lily asleep in the next room, of James's kind words, of Olivia's tears, of Samantha's betrayal. Most of all, she thought of Richard and the decades of silence he had enforced. No more, she vowed. The evidence was in motion, the truth undeniable. The trial would come, and with it, justice. But for now, she closed her eyes and let the silence of the snowy night settle over her, drawing strength from the promise that the cycle was breaking at last. 2 weeks later, the courthouse stood beneath a sky heavy with snow, its stone steps covered in white that crunched under boots as people hurried inside. The trees lining the street were bare, their branches etched like black veins against the pale sky, and the air carried a bitter stillness that mirrored the gravity of what was about to unfold. Natalie walked through the cold with Lily at her side, the little girl bundled in a red coat, her hand gripping her mother's tightly. Olivia walked with them, her scarf pulled tight around her neck, her breath visible in the freezing air. Nurse James had volunteered to stay with Lily in the waiting area once more, his calm presence steady as stone. He bent down to Lily's level before they entered. "You know, special detectives need helpers. You are my partner today. Your mom is going to speak very bravely in there, and you will be cheering her on from right here." Lily smiled, faintly reassured, clutching her brave journal. Natalie kissed her daughter's forehead and whispered, "For you, everything is for you." Then she walked into the courtroom with Olivia beside her. The chamber was hushed, the winter light filtering through tall windows onto polished wooden benches. The smell of old paper and varnish filled the air. Richard sat at the defense table, his face lined and gray, his once proud posture sagging slightly, but his eyes still defiant. Beside him, his lawyer shuffled papers, preparing arguments. Across the aisle, Victor Reynolds' slouched arrogance dulled now by weeks of confinement, his cuffed wrists hidden under the table. Samantha Wells sat near the back, her expression a mixture of regret and fear, her betrayal written in every line of her face. The prosecutor presented the charges: Richard Morgan for child endangerment and abuse, Victor Reynolds for distribution and exposing a child to dangerous substances, Samantha for complicity. The judge, stern and unsmiling, called for the first witnesses. Dr. Jenkins spoke of the toxicology reports, the sedative in Lily's bloodstream. Dr. Chin described Lily's drawings, her quiet revelations about the house, the woman with red hair, the glowing watch. Detective Parker laid out the search results from Victor's residence, the prescription bottles, the photographs, the evidence of children being present at parties. Samantha was called, her voice shaking as she admitted what she had done, how she had given Lily the drink at Richard's command. She looked at Natalie as she spoke, tears streaming, but Natalie's face remained carved in stone. When Natalie was called to testify, she stood tall, her voice strong despite the tremor in her chest. She told the court of that Friday afternoon, of Richard arriving unannounced, of Olivia urging her to relent, of Lily's eagerness and her own dread. She spoke of the sleepless night, the unanswered calls, the Saturday text that felt like a lie, and the Sunday return with Lily silent and feverish. She told them about the hospital, the drawing of the strange house, the way her daughter whispered about the red-haired woman and Victor's glowing watch. Every word was a blade cutting through the defense's narrative. Richard's lawyer tried to discredit her, calling her emotional, unstable, bent on vengeance. But Natalie held her ground. "This is not about me," she said firmly, her voice echoing in the chamber. "This is about my daughter. He put her in danger. He put her in the hands of people who gave her drugs. And I will never forgive him for that." The room was silent except for the scratch of pens. Then Olivia rose. For decades, she had remained in the background, quiet, complicit, telling herself survival meant silence. But not now. She stepped forward, her voice shaking but resolute. She looked directly at Richard, the man she had once loved, the man she had defended too long. "I told my daughter to trust you," she said, her tone ringing across the courtroom. "I told her to give you a chance, and now my granddaughter lies scarred because of it. You destroyed me when we were young. You crushed Natalie under your hand, and I kept telling her to endure. I let you shape our family with fear. But I am done. I will not protect you anymore. I will not let you harm another child. You have taken too much, and today it ends." Her words hung in the air like frost, piercing and undeniable. The courtroom fell into a silence so deep it was suffocating. The judge's eyes narrowed, the jury leaned forward, even the defense lawyer's hands froze above his papers. Richard's face darkened, his mouth opening as if to retort, but no words came. The silence stretched longer and longer, the air thick with the weight of decades of pain finally voiced. Natalie's breath caught her heart pounding. Every gaze in the room turned toward Richard, waiting, judging. In those moments, the cold seemed to seep into the very walls, freezing time. The stillness was broken only by the faint shuffle of a bailiff shifting his weight, the metallic jingle of keys at his belt. Then came the sound, sharp and final, the clink of handcuffs snapping closed around Richard's wrists. The noise echoed like a gunshot in the silence, a brutal punctuation to the years of silence and denial. Natalie closed her eyes as tears slipped down her cheeks, the sound reverberating in her bones. Olivia exhaled shakily, her hand gripping the bench in front of her for support. The gavel struck once, sealing the decision. Richard was found guilty. Victor Reynolds, too. Samantha received a suspended sentence for cooperation, but the court's judgment was clear. Justice had spoken. As Richard was led away, his steps heavy, the chain between the cuffs rattling, Natalie felt something release inside her chest, the grip of his control, the shadow of his presence finally loosening. She turned to Olivia, whose face was streaked with tears, but whose eyes burned with newfound resolve. They embraced not as mother and daughter divided by silence, but as women bound together by survival and truth. Outside, snowflakes drifted gently onto the courthouse steps, muffling the world in soft white. The storm had broken. Justice had been delivered. 1 month had passed since the trial, and winter still lingered, though the days grew longer. The hospital windows were fogged with the breath of early morning thin frost patterns clinging to the glass. Natalie sat at the table in her apartment, steam rising from a mug of tea, while Lily scribbled into her brave journal with a set of new-colored pencils James had gifted her. The nurse had become something more than a caretaker in those weeks, a presence of light returning often with small supplies or simple encouragements. He had delivered the pencils with a smile and said, "Draw what makes you happy and tape it all around your bed so you can see courage when you wake up." Lily had grinned and immediately set to work drawing tulips, smiling suns, and superheroes with shields. The house was quiet now, not with the silence of dread, but with the gentle peace of recovery. Olivia had begun spending nights with them, sometimes sleeping on the couch, sometimes sitting late into the evening, confessing regrets. She admitted often how guilt gnawed at her for years, how she told Natalie to endure, how she forced her to hand Lily over to Richard. Each confession was painful, but each one also lightened her chest a little more. The honesty forging a new bond with her daughter. Natalie listened sometimes with tears, sometimes with quiet nods, but always with a resolve to let the truth be spoken at last. The city moved on around them, but inside their small circle, healing had begun to take root. By early March, the first signs of spring appeared. Drops of dew glistened on tulip shoots in the garden bed Natalie and Lily had planted with Eleanor, their elderly neighbor, who had guided them gently through the past months. The woman spoke of patience and growth, of how tulip bulbs sleep through winter, gathering strength unseen, and then burst forth with color when the season turned. Lily repeated her words often, telling her mother proudly, "We are like tulips, Mommy. We got stronger in the dark." Natalie would hug her tightly, unable to speak through the rush of emotion. At the hospital follow-up, Dr. Jenkins pronounced Lily healthy, her body free of toxins, her spirit resilient. Dr. Chin continued working with Lily, now using therapy sessions not only to process, but to build confidence. Lily showed other children in group therapy her brave journal, flipping through pages of drawings and explaining how the bad feelings got smaller each time she drew. The other children listened wide-eyed, and Natalie saw her daughter becoming not just a survivor, but a guide for others. Olivia attended support meetings too, sitting with other parents and grandparents, speaking for the first time about her own years of silence under Richard's control. Her voice trembled, but she told them how she had once told her daughter to stay quiet, and how she now knew silence only feeds cruelty. The room often fell quiet as her words landed heavy and true. James continued to visit always with a new story. One night he told Lily how his mother once sat with him through endless nights of illness, how he had thought he could not endure, and how her hand on his forehead gave him strength. Lily listened closely, then said softly, "That is like my mom. She stayed the whole time, too." James smiled, and Natalie's throat tightened with gratitude. By April, the air softened and sunlight warmed their faces as they walked through the neighborhood. The trial was behind them. Richard remained in prison. Victor, too, while Samantha lived under probation, her attempts to apologize met with silence from Natalie. She had chosen her side, and the wound she left would not heal quickly. Yet the family no longer felt defined by betrayal. They were shaped instead by resilience. One bright morning, Natalie led Lily into the yard where tulips had burst open petals glowing red and yellow in the spring sun. Dewdrops clung like jewels, and the scent of earth rose sweet and fresh. Lily crouched, touching the petals carefully. They remembered to grow, she whispered with awe. Olivia stood behind them, her hands folded, tears sliding down her cheeks at the simple beauty. Natalie pulled her daughter close, breathing in the scent of spring, feeling the warmth on her face, and whispered, "Justice cannot erase the past, but it gives us a new beginning." Lily nodded solemnly, then laughed, her voice light and free, running across the garden with Mr. Apple. Whiskers clutched to her chest. Natalie watched her, the weight of years, lifting the promise of the future, bright as the blossoms around them. She turned to Olivia, who whispered, "We made it through the winter." Natalie answered softly, "Yes, and we will never go back." The wind stirred, carrying the fragrance of flowers, the sound of laughter, the memory of silence broken at last. They had survived the storm, and now they stood in the light of spring, stronger, unbroken, and free.